Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Joe Lumello. As Bill mentioned, I am the manager of grief services for Hospice East Bay. I've been with Hospice East Bay for 13 years. I've been doing this work actually for over 30 years, and I am honored to be part of this presentation with you. And I would love to share this opportunity to have Veronica share some of her background.
Good morning and welcome. I am Veronica Deese Hodge. I'm a part of the commission. I've been here 3.5 years. I am also a pastor and a doctoral candidate. I'm very passionate about dealing with grief and dealing with the various issues that come along with grief. So we're putting this together collaboratively.
Yep.
Hospice East Bay. And I just like to add, we're very, very appreciative of you showing up.
Yes.
Because a lot of people sign up but don't show up, and you took it upon yourself to actually follow through. We appreciate your presence.
Thank you. All right, let's get started with the presentation then. So what will we be covering today? Oh, now this isn't working. Oh, you did that? Okay, sorry. So just so you know, the animation stops when you see a little asterisk on the right side of the screen. Sorry, you're going to be busy. All right. Well, thank you. So basically, just to review, what we're going to be talking about today is that, first of all, we'll delve into holiday expectations, what the holidays mean to us, what they signify for us, especially now that we're trying to make meaning of the holidays without our loved ones in it. We will identify feelings of grief. We will review some common grief reactions. We'll explore potential holiday grief triggers and coping skills to deal with those triggers. And we'll develop strategies to manage grief during the holiday season. And for those of you who are supporting others who are dealing with their grief, we'll provide a little bit of information on how to support a grieving friend or loved one. Any questions before we move forward? All righty. So this very first slide, I deliberately titled Hallmark Holiday. I know what that means in my mind when I think of a Hallmark holiday. Certainly all of those Hallmark holiday movies where there is this sort of picture perfect happy ending. But to me, it also reminds me, I'm not sure if you remember Norman Rockwell and that one particular illustration he did of the Thanksgiving dinner, where everyone at the table is happy and excited. And it depicts to me that almost too perfect of a holiday. And I think if you're anything like me, we start to believe that that's what our holidays need to look like. We also have family traditions that are very important to us for the holidays. So the holidays can be a time of tremendous happiness because we're acknowledging that sense of connection that we have. And when a loved one dies, it can also feel as if a huge void is in our lives, and it's going to color the holiday experience for us. So what we tend to do is we'll either double down on making the holiday exactly perfect, whatever that means for each of us, or we'll tend to pull away and retreat from the entire experience because it's too overwhelming. And we're going to have feelings about both of those realities. So we're going to talk about that in more detail. So consider the following when referencing a Hallmark holiday and what it may mean to you. Were your previous holiday celebrations consistently happy and joyous? Is it possible to recreate that atmosphere without your loved one in it? Do you imagine that everybody else, aside from you, because of the grief that you're dealing with, everyone else is having that perfect Hallmark holiday? And you're now facing the holidays without your loved one in it. Are you concerned that it's not going to be perfect or even come close? And then, were your past holiday seasons challenged with interpersonal conflicts or disappointments? And each year, did you hold hope that the next holiday was going to be that perfect Hallmark holiday? So think about that throughout this presentation and see how any of that applies to what you're experiencing through the holiday season right now, or what you may be concerned that you'll have to deal with through the holiday season. Now, before we get to really talking about how to cope with grief, let's, for the sake of this discussion, define what we mean by grief. And this is what this next slide's all about. So the concept of grief is something that in our culture is something that we associate with the death of a human. However, when you think of the range of emotions that one experiences when they're grieving, it really is an emotional response, well, also physical, an emotional response to a sudden and traumatic, life-changing event. So those emotions don't simply appear when a loved one dies. We really do experience them routinely. However, we don't seem to make that connection that that range of emotions really is the same as what we utilize for the death of a loved one. So grief is a natural response to the death of a loved one. It really is an extension of the love we have for the person who died. So expecting, again, another cultural narrative here, expecting that grief ends over a period of time may not be the most realistic way of thinking about grief. I prefer to think of grief as an extension of love. So therefore, I don't want to necessarily stop grieving. However, I want my feelings of grief to change over time.
Excuse me, let me just interject here.
Please do.
We know as a society, they do not normally allow a period of grief to be extended, right? They feel like when your loved one leaves you, you're supposed to be over it in 6 weeks, 6 months, or a year.
There you go.
But the reality is grief is experienced differently by everyone. So unfortunately, society tries to dictate if your grief is prolonged more than a year, you have what they define as prolonged grief disorder. And that's not the case at all. We're all human. We all have different experiences. So if you have a family member or a friend that says to you, oh my God, it's been a year. Oh my God, it's been 2 years. You should be over it. Just discard that and be mindful and just stand up and empower yourself and say, that's not necessarily the case. That's how you interpret and experience grief. That's not what I'm experiencing right now. Because people always have a way of judging and categorizing situations. So this is where we have to be mindful to empower ourselves and stand up and say what we have to say. That's your experience. That's not my experience. I just wanted to add that and just empower you that way, because it's not about what man says or woman says or whoever says. It's about your own internal feelings. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a great point. And if there's nothing else that you take away from this experience today, this presentation today, is that this is your journey. You get to define the experience rather than other people telling you how you, quote, should feel or shouldn't feel. And we will definitely break that down a little bit more during the presentation. So thank you for that. Grief is an internal expression for the person who's died. It's an inevitable part of living. And I mean, unless you're that rare human being that has no other interpersonal connections, then you may be spared the grief experience. However, it really is about the fact that we as humans are social creatures. We make meaningful connections with others. And when that connection is severed, we're going to have a response to it. Each person's experience of grief, as you were alluding to, is different. There is no universal way to grieve. While grief is a universal concept, there's no single right way to go through the grief journey. So what does grief feel like? Well, it really affects every single part of our existence. We tend to associate grief with emotions, and that makes sense because that's the most common way that grief manifests. However, grief also impacts us physically. And there are several studies out that make a direct connection with unaddressed grief and body dysfunction of some kind, increased illnesses, unexplained problems with the body, with physical movement or whatnot. Stomach issues come up frequently for people who are grieving. I see a nod in the audience. That's because our emotions are tied into our immune system, and our immune system is tied into our gastrointestinal tract. So if the emotions are not being sufficiently addressed, they're going to pop up in other places in our lives.
I'd like to chime here as well. We term that somatic symptoms, right? Your body is responding to whatever this given situation is, this topical. So when you find yourself going through and experiencing those feelings, just take a pause and just ground yourself and recognize and say, well, I'm having problems with my stomach. I never had problems with my stomach before. I'm having problems with my sleep habits. I've never had problems before. And oftentimes, if we just stop and ground ourselves and just dig a little bit deep and reflect, oh, what has happened that's new in my life that's created this that I didn't experience before? And it's often tied to the loss of that loved one. So when you find yourself going through that, it's in connection with whatever you're experiencing, because as Joe nicely said, they're both intertwined, they're not separate, right? So offer your, just go with it and just accept it and just move forward and do what you need to do, because self-care is important. And take care of yourself, because that's your body's way of saying, we need to step back from whatever it is you may be doing, and we need to analyze this and just deal with it.
Yeah, the body's amazing that way, isn't it? It is. So over the next couple of slides, I would like to identify some of the more common grief reactions. However, by no means is it a complete list. So some of the more common grief reactions are shock and numbness, fatigue and exhaustion. I think we need to go back one slide. That's okay. Sleep disruption, meaning that you either are not sleeping enough or you're sleeping throughout the majority of the day. Lack of appetite or increased appetite. Restlessness or irritability, increased sensitivity to stimuli, deep sadness or emptiness, heartache, and grief attacks. We're going to be talking about these grief attacks or grief triggers in a couple in a couple of more slides. So we'll be more specific about that. Let me show you in the next slide some additional common grief reactions. They're anger, guilt and regret, relief, fear, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, isolating from others or withdrawing, forgetfulness or disorientation. A lot of folks refer to a grief fog during those early months after the loss of a loved one, where you're getting through the day, but you're not 100% tracking what's going on. You may find yourself walking down the hall to another room and then forgetting what you're doing, or go to the supermarket and completely forget why you went there. This is fairly common for folks. Those first few months are very disorienting. You're trying to make sense of everything that you experienced up until that point, and also have a great fear of what the future may or may not hold for you. Let's see, what else? Difficulty focusing, that foggy brain. Needing to be around people who understand. Staying busy, oh, that busy work, just so you don't have to feel. So you now engage in meeting other people's needs, or you might find that you're, doing a lot of different activities just so you don't have to think or experience your grief. What else? Talking to the deceased and questioning our belief systems.
And here too, I'd like to chime in that these are all normal feelings. That does not mean that there's anything wrong with you. If you were not experiencing some of these feelings, and that would be somewhat problematic, right? So you feel these feelings, and if you feel like you just cannot deal with it on your own, it's okay to talk to your local pastor, your friend group, or seek out a grief counseling group. where you can go in and talk about experiences and where you're not judged. Look at side eye. It's important to go into a forum where you feel safe and you can speak what you're experiencing. And oftentimes you'll get a name to what these symptoms are, like some lead into grief and depression. And it's just a matter of just helping to take care of yourself and realizing and reflecting that this is what I'm going through right now. And I'm not abnormal. I'm okay.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So what makes each person's grief unique? Well, first of all, who you are as an individual. Your views about pain, about how to cope with painful, life-changing events, what you've learned from your family of origin about expressing emotion, whether it's considered a good thing or a bad thing. Your faith system or your spirituality is going to inform how you grieve. The person that died, the relationship you had with them, not only the relationship being spouse or sibling, but also the quality of the relationship you had with them. The timing and circumstances of that individual's death, how you've processed, how you've grieved other losses in your life, your coping skills, and the extent of your support system. Let's move on to some holiday grief triggers. I mentioned that word or grief attack a little earlier, and maybe some of you have experienced this. So grief triggers are pretty much anything that causes you to revert to your feelings of grief without warning. A great example, a client of mine years ago said, I was in the supermarket going down the pasta aisle, and all of a sudden, her words, I lost it. And I didn't know why. So we talked about it for a bit. And she came to the understanding why was that her husband's favorite meal that she prepared was this specific pasta dish. So of course she was in the pasta aisle, not making the connection. She glanced at a product that maybe sparked that connection, and then the tears just came. And she was deeply embarrassed by the fact that she was crying, which is something, again, our culture sort of tells us it's either a good thing or a bad thing. There's a right time and a wrong time. Hey, grief doesn't follow a schedule. So that goes out the window. So what sort of grief triggers might we be experiencing around the holidays, especially, but certainly throughout the year? Special occasions like holidays are grief triggers. Again, that Hallmark holiday concept that we discussed earlier in the presentation, what in your mind's eye, what it's all supposed to look like, and in reality, how it all played out, and whether or not those two realities jive for you. Favorite songs, something that your loved one may have dedicated to you, or that song that you danced to at your wedding, or that song that created that special memory that made your bond even closer. You hear that out of the blue, it's going to potentially be a trigger for you.
And I'd like to add here, even with that, it can be a word. It can be a word that your beloved used to say, and you can just be out tending to your business, and then all of a sudden you hear in conversation as you're passing that word that your beloved used to phrase, right? And that before you know it, you're in tears. No one knows why but you. And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. But as my colleague nicely said, people are just so used to judging and putting everything in a box and categorizing things. But it's okay. It's okay to do all of that.
Point. And along those lines, certain sounds and or smells. My mother died over 10 years ago, and just a few weeks ago, I was going through cleaning out my closet, and I found an old suitcase of hers that I forgot I had. And you know what? I opened it up, and all of a sudden, this smell from inside the suitcase brought back memories that I didn't even know were memories. And it was a moment of connection, and it was bittersweet. It reminded me of her loss, but it also made me feel closer to her in some way. And lost opportunities, the woulda, shoulda, couldas that I think we all experience when a loved one dies. You know, that trip that you were planning, or the fact that your loved one won't see your child or grandchild at their wedding or at graduation. All of these lost opportunities are also opportunities to express grief. So how, the $64,000 question, how long does grief last? And Veronica, you mentioned at the top of the presentation, this concept that grief is supposed to stop at a certain time. The one I hear most often, and you brought it up, was that 1 year mark. After a year, you're suddenly supposed to not have these strong feelings. And as you mentioned again, if you do, well, then there must be something wrong with you. And if you take nothing else away from this, please know there is nothing wrong with you still having feelings of grief a year or more after the death of your loved one. And if you ascribe to what I shared earlier, I don't think the goal is to make the grief stop. The goal is to gain control over how you choose to grieve.
And along with that, I heard many of you say that you were with your beloved 20 years or more. That's a long time to be in partnership with an individual that you're engaging every day, you're talking every day, you're eating every day, you're traveling. So where does it stand that a year is going to take precedence over someone that you've been with 20 plus years? Who is the deciding factor in that conversation? Maybe we need to dissect them and see what's going on with their cognition. Because a year equates to 20 years, there's no way to do that. So just take your time and take as long as it takes to go on with your loved one and the memories.
Yeah. Grief is a lifelong process. It's not linear. Again, we want to believe, our culture is solution focused. So we want to believe that grief is sort of akin to a staircase where you're at that very first step and it's overwhelming. And the goal is over a period of time that with every step you take, the grief will lessen. And believe me, if that was the nature of grief, we probably wouldn't be having this presentation right now. You're all well aware that it doesn't quite work that way. I like to think of grief as the analogy of grief as a roller coaster. So, as you all know, the purpose of a roller coaster ride, the early part is profound ups and downs, so you can gain momentum for the ride. Eventually, though, the ride does level out. You get your bearings again. You're able to stand. You're able to exit the ride and move on to whatever is next in your life. To me, that's a better or a healthier way of acknowledging grief. Otherwise, if you feel that it's a linear process and you haven't taken that next step that you feel you, quote, should take, then suddenly we start doubting ourselves, start doubting our feelings of grief as something that is wrong or pathological even. So I love this quote from Anne Grant: "Grief is a process, not a state." So let's talk about some coping skills. How to sort of anticipate potential triggers is maybe a better way of looking at that. So one of the easiest ways is mark your calendar. If you have a year-long calendar, put down important dates, holidays, anniversaries, birthdays. So that way, it's not, when the day comes, that's not to say that you will not have an emotional response to it, but you're better prepared to deal with that emotional response. Identify the trigger. Take note, the lady in the pasta aisle, once she had time to make meaning of the experience, I guarantee you dollars to donuts the next time she went in the store, she was a little more prepared that when she went down the pasta aisle, Hey, if I look at that certain product on the shelf, it may trigger me. So it's about being, I guess, more intentional in your grief process. Accept your feelings. And I say that with some degree of understanding that what you may be feeling is awful right now. And it's completely understandable. However, if we tend to resist those feelings, if we tend to resist experiencing them, grief will not go away by itself. Sweeping it into a corner will work for a little bit. I'll be honest with you. But as a long-term solution, we find that what tends to happen, as we mentioned earlier, is the grief is going to reappear in some other way. It'll manifest itself physically is the most common next step if grief isn't addressed from an emotional perspective. And find your special place. If you know that you have a certain safe place, a room in your home, or being able to, if you're out in public, know that you can go into your car and just be safe if you're triggered by something. That's important. So try to have those planned out through however you navigate your day, wherever that is. Make sure that you have access to a place where you can experience your feelings and feel comfortable knowing that you are alone, you feel safe, that no one will potentially see you grieving if that makes you uncomfortable, or worse yet, have an opinion about how you're grieving. So, some strategies that do not work. And let me preface that by saying, for short term, many of these strategies may work. However, again, long term, they tend to actually have an opposite effect. And they are avoidance, this is a reoccurring theme. If we avoid the grief for a while, it'll work, right? If we get busy with other activities, taking care of other people, just making sure that our entire day is one frenzy of being busy, that may work. But for those of you that have tried it, there's always sometime during the day, more often than not, it's about just before you go to sleep, where you're no longer busy. You can no longer avoid those feelings and they creep out, right? So, avoidance. Again, short-term maybe, long-term not so much. Isolation. We saw so much of that during the pandemic, and we in our line of work are still seeing the challenges that isolation has caused folks who are grieving. Grief is something that is better addressed in community, which is why our support groups are so popular. Being, as you mentioned earlier, being in an environment where people aren't going to judge you for having feelings, regardless of what they are, is something that most of us don't have in our day-to-day lives. So it just knowing, you don't have, in a group, you don't have to talk, but just showing up and hearing other people can have a very positive effect with your own feelings of grief. Overworking or overextending is really common. Again, that busy work. Oh, I'll just stay busy so I don't have to think about it. Again, short term, it may help. Long term, not so much. Rumination, just constantly thinking about that loss. I've heard from many individuals in this work, it's that review of those final days or weeks before their loved one died. And again, that whole series of woulda, shoulda, couldas. We should have seen the doctor sooner. I should have made my loved one go for that treatment. I should have been aware that my loved one was becoming ill. Why wasn't I on top of this? Again, that's not necessarily an effective coping mechanism off the bat. Blaming yourself or blaming things that you have no control over. And then the use of some kind of altering activity, like the use of alcohol or drugs to numb out. You may need that to stop the pain. And I'm not going to judge you for that. We all go through this differently. However, long-term effect of alcohol and drug use isn't going to necessarily take the pain away.
I'd like to add here that oftentimes when we self-medicate in situations like that, it only elevates the situation, right? Because oftentimes persons, not necessarily alcohol, but maybe pills, or if you exercise, over-exercise. I'm sure you've all have heard that phrase, whenever you do too much of anything, it's not good for you, right? So it's all about connectiveness and belonging. And with that connectedness and that belonging with your beloved, it's been severed. So you find a replacement, but we need to stop if we can. It's okay. If not, it's okay. And just find a healthy way of reading or being a participant in the community or your church affiliation or a book club group or planning or walking or whatever that other thing can be to kind of help us navigate through that time, right? So we can make sure that we're executing the self-care in a healthy way.
So we've kind of now identified grief, some of the triggers that will intensify your grief or bring your grief to the forefront. Let's now focus on how to cope with the holidays in earnest. So your holiday plans, let's talk about those. While you're getting ready for the holiday, please consider the following. What do you imagine is going to be the most difficult aspect of this holiday for you? Who do you predict will be the most difficult people to be with during this time? And I'm not saying that it isn't, these aren't people that you necessarily love. However, you're grieving. Who in your network, who in the group of people that will be attending your holiday gatherings is going to challenge your feelings of grief, going to make you feel as if your grief is defective in some way. And conversely, who in your gathering is going to be a supportive presence, is going to support you the way you need to during this holiday season. What do you think will be your triggers for the holiday? Places, food, scent, individuals. And who are some of the people, again, that are going to comfort you? So when working with clients, tell people or suggest to clients that they create a list of their support system. And in one column, you put down the names of everyone in your system of support, family, friends, anyone. In the next column, next to their name, put down how you feel they support you. What I mean by that is, John is really great at making me laugh. Every time I'm with John, I'm crying with tears. Sally is really good at allowing me to express my feelings without trying to change my feelings, without trying to change my perspective. Sam is a really good cook, and every time I want a home-cooked meal, I go to Sam's house. And so that way, you actually have a physical list of how the people in your lives support you. And I caution you not to make the assumption that your spouse or your child is supposed to support you in a certain way because of their relationship with you. Try to pull away from that concept and try to look at each of the names on your list for what they do for you. And the next time you need support in some way, you need someone who will just let you cry unconditionally, go see Sally. She's really good at it. Don't go to John, who makes you laugh, because you're not going to get what you need from that person. Does that make sense? All right, let's move. Anything you want to add? Okay, so let's move on to the holiday job list. So thinking about your past holidays and the various tasks that you have done in your past holidays, ask yourself the following. For this holiday season, is there something that you want to do differently? It doesn't have to be differently forever. It could be differently just this one holiday, if that's what you need to get through it. Do you do these tasks out of habit, tradition, free choice, or obligation? You know, if you're the person everyone comes to for Thanksgiving and you're the person responsible for making the turkey, well, do you like doing it? Or does it feel like something that you have to do? It's a task. And do you want to do that this holiday? You're still trying to process your feelings of grief. Is this a one-person job or can it be shared? If you were the person totally responsible for the meal last year, you may want to ask for some help this year round. And again, not forever, just this one holiday. Are you responsible to see that it all gets done? Is that something you like doing? Have you dreaded that? The buck stops with you. And bottom line, do you like doing the task? If it gives you a sense of pleasure, then please continue to do so. If it's not, then maybe just for this one holiday, you're going to take a break. I know of folks that have taken the entire holiday off, and it felt good for them. And I know others who needed to be surrounded by the people they love in order to just get through that day and everything in between.
And I like to add here, it's about self-advocacy. During this time, as the holidays come up, especially for those of us who have newly lost loved ones, we need to advocate. If everyone's used, like Joe nicely said, used to coming to my house for the holiday, and I'm not feeling it, it is okay to say, you know what, let's go over to Mary's house this year. Because right now I'm having certain feelings and I have to deal with those feelings without having the pressure, having to prepare all of this food, get my house ready for the company and all these other things. Advocate for yourselves. I don't feel up to doing this. I've taken the charge for so many years. It's time for somebody else to take the lead. And whatever response you get back from whoever these persons are, that's okay. It's all right for people to say what they want to say, feel the way they want to feel, do what they want to do, but it's up to you how you react and respond to that, right? So if nothing else, advocate for yourself.
And that may be something new for some of you. You know, so many of us tend to put our needs last and everyone else's needs first. So this may be something that is a bit of a challenge. Give yourselves an opportunity. Use your grief as an opportunity to try something new. So here's some really, we're going to drill down into some more strategies about how to get through the holiday over the next, 1, 2, 3, 4 slides. All right. So strategies for coping with the holidays. Adjust your expectations. Again, if it needs to be just for this holiday, then be it, but adjust your expectations. The holidays aren't going to be the same no matter what you do. Your loved one isn't there. So to have the goal of creating that without a really important part of the holiday season isn't realistic. So do your best to adjust your expectations this year. Decide what you can handle this year and tell others, like we were talking about in the previous slide. Identify the things that you feel you want or can do this holiday season, and then let people know. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so do friend and family systems. So if you're setting limits, other people will come in to take on those other tasks. Do what feels comfortable. Again, may be hard for some folks to put their needs in front of others, but you're grieving. You have a free pass to think about yourself this year and do what you feel you need to do. And if you do it and if it doesn't feel right, you have the ability to change your mind and try something else. keep some traditions and start some new ones. This may be a great opportunity to look back at your holiday seasons to see what worked particularly well and what didn't. And this tremendous loss may give you an opportunity to hit a reset button on your holidays, letting folks know how you want to experience them from this point forward. Ask for help. You know, if you've decided to take on a task and you're in the thick of it and you realize that you're just not in a place emotionally or physically to deal with it, reach out to somebody else. Find someone to listen. And now this is really key. I think all of us think we're good listeners. In reality, not so much, because when someone is speaking and we're in the listening phase, we're spending a lot of that time formulating our response to that person. So that person isn't really being heard. And you may have experienced that where you've said something to someone and they're only partially listening and their reply to you is completely out of context. So active listening, something that we do in the counseling field, is to hear without trying to formulate a response what an individual is saying. And for me, one of the tricks that I like when it's done to me is tricks. One of the techniques that I like when it's done to me is that someone is able to paraphrase back what they heard me say. That to me makes me feel heard. Because not only did they take the time to listen, they took the time to hear it and translate it back to me in their own words. That I feel completely heard. And I don't know if any of you have experienced that. When it happens, and it's rare, it's a good feeling. And if you haven't, I'm sorry. It's fairly common. Most humans don't listen. However, hopefully there is someone in your support system, someone's in your support system that are good listeners, that aren't trying to change how you're feeling or try to suggest that the way you're grieving is defective in some way or pathological in some way. And we'll get into some of that a little bit later in the presentation too. Anything you want to add?
I just want to add along with that, which was nicely said by Joe, is when we're in a conversation or we're sharing with someone, it feels wonderful to know that they are able to reflect back to us what was said or to clarify, did I hear you say this? I just want to make sure that I didn't misinterpret what you said, because that means not only are they actively listening to you, they are authentically present. Although there's many factors going on in their lives as well, they're actively listening and authentically present. And that means the world, especially when you've lost someone that you dearly loved and you're sharing your heart and just sharing my experiences in the good and the bad. That's a valuable tool. It's such a gift to be able to be in the presence of that. So as you go through your process, just be mindful to step back and think, who do I have in my circle again, as Joe said, that actually does that with me? Because that's worth more than $1 billion if you have that in your life, really. Thank you.
Thanks, that's great. Agree. Oh, sorry. There's still a little bit more on that slide. Make time for exercise or anything that feels that it helps replenish you in some way. Could be exercise, meditation, yoga, whatever works for you. Prioritize. Again, don't let yourself get stuck in the busy work. Try to have an action plan of what tasks you want to take on this holiday season and which ones you want to delegate to someone else. And, you know, spending time enjoying nature, I got to say, after a tough day of listening to so much pain and so much heartache, sometimes I'm blessed. I live in Napa, so my drive home is one of the most beautiful drives in the world. And that helps replenish this battery so I can come back the next day and do the work. I encourage you all, if you don't have that thing that charges up your battery, think about it. What gives you a sense of joy? What gives you a sense of completeness? And try to bring that into your day-to-day routine so you can be 100, as close to 100% as possible while you're grieving. Again, we mentioned a possibility of meditation or prayer if you ascribe to a certain faith system or have a sense of spirituality, can be of benefit to you. Use music as a mood lifter. Be, again, mindful of potential triggers. But if you are musically inclined, let the music wash over you, give you what you need in order to get through that day. Include your departed loved one in the celebration, and that can be done in a number of ways. I've heard of some families setting an extra place at the table to honor their loved one. It could be something as simple as lighting a candle, creating an altar, encouraging other people who are attending your event to share a story or a memento or something that connects them to your departed loved one. In other words, welcoming them into the room even though they can't physically be there.
And here I'd like to add, I don't know how many of you like to write, but even journaling. Just sit down on your sofa or your love seat or wherever it is, in the backyard, on the patio, down by the ocean, out in the park, and just journal. Write a letter to your loved one. Mail it to your home, right? Plant a tree in honor of your loved one. Develop some kind of nursery, if you like, if you're a gardener or other things. There's so many things that you could do that way where you just go sit with that tree or that plant or those vegetables or down by the water and just have a conversation. So what people think if they see you sitting there, you can be on your cell phone, it's nobody's business. And just have a conversation. Write a letter, mail it to them. If you celebrate Christmas, Christmas is coming. Get a Christmas card, mail it to your house, address it to your loved one. And then you just open it up and just celebrate and let the tears flow, and it is okay. That is all okay. And for those that don't understand, so what? Are they going to pay any of your bills? No. So don't worry about what their thoughts are. Self-care, advocate, self-advocacy. Thank you.
I love the idea of planting the tree. That's such a great idea. I mean, you get to see that tree grow over the years and that connection that you have. I love that. And you're right. I will not share the exact words my client used, but I had a client that came in one day who was absolutely livid. He had a bit of a foul mouth, but he came and said, opinions are like the thing you sit on. Everyone has one, and I am sick and tired of people telling me how I should feel, how I should think, how I should talk. And I said, you're absolutely right. And yet, it's part of human nature. We humans are opinionated. And we tend to want to share those opinions, whether or not we've been asked to do so. And I'm sure all of you experienced that at one point or another in your lives. It's the nature of it. Let's see. Invite others to share stories. Again, we get into this weirdness about, gosh, I don't want to talk about so-and-so because it's going to make my friends sad if I share stories about them. So there's this gorilla in the room. We're all there. We all know that this individual has passed away, but nobody wants to talk about it for fear that somebody might have an emotional response. Well, my philosophy is, I think everyone is waiting for the other person to start the conversation. So I encourage you to share stories of your loved ones. That's going to open up that's going to give permission to others to share their stories of your departed loved one as well. And that can be an incredibly therapeutic experience. And even if you do have an emotional response, so be it. It was meant to be. like this one. Buy a gift for your loved one, then donate it to charity. Or like you said, send yourself a Christmas card. Buy yourself a gift on behalf of your loved one to you, if that's what it takes. Do something meaningful. Volunteer at a food bank or a toy drive, some in honor of your loved one. And really important, plan to spend the holidays with people you love. People you enjoy, who can support you. Allow people to comfort you, provided that the comfort that they're offering is actually comforting. We'll get into this in a few slides, but a lot of times people think it's comforting to say, well, you should be grateful for the time you had with your loved one. I don't think that's comforting at all. And yet, how many people have heard something to that effect? Yeah. I'm embarrassed to say that I've actually said it myself. It's that awkwardness around death and dying, grief and loss that we as a culture don't know what to do with. So we end up saying things that, because we want to be comforting, we want us to be supportive, but they end up falling, well, at best, flat, at worst, hurtful. Try to get enough rest, whatever that means for you. Shop sensibly and keep spending under control. Money isn't going to bring back your loved one. It's not going to fill that void. Believe me, I've tried, and it does not work. Allow room for laughter and joy. The grief process, I think we tend to think, is something that only a certain range of emotions are acceptable. Well, laughter is a big part of it. Especially if you're sharing stories of your loved one, there are going to be funny times. It's not disrespectful to enjoy memories of your loved one. Don't be afraid to cry. Don't be embarrassed, I think is the better word, to cry. Tears are a good thing. It's a natural, healthy release. Spend quiet time alone thinking, if that works for you. And remind yourself they won't be as awful as you think. Our fear of the holiday often is significantly greater than the actual holiday experience. Anything you want to add?
No.
Okay. So, when to seek support? Well, if any of the symptoms that you're going through feel as if they're out of your control, or they just don't, they're overwhelming you, it's a good time to reach out to somebody. And as Veronica mentioned, that somebody could be someone within your faith tradition, a chaplain, it could be a therapist, it could be a grief counselor, it could be a dear friend, it could be anyone, or it could be a group of individuals, depending on what your need is. But don't be afraid to reach out. If you're engaging in risky behaviors in order to cope with your grief, if you're drinking excessively, if you decided to take drugs that you were not necessarily prescribed for whatever you're dealing with to numb out that pain, you might want to reach out to somebody. If you experience a pervasive sense that prevents you from having relationships, if there's a fear of not wanting to re-engage with other individuals because you're afraid that doing so, if they go away, may cause additional pain. Well, humans are social by nature, so isolating yourself from others, you might want to talk to somebody about that. If you're constantly keeping busy to avoid your grief, have you heard this is a recurring theme here, that's busy work to avoid? Again, short term, it might help. Long term, not so much. There's a constant preoccupation with death for an extended period of time. It's perfectly understandable that you're going to be focused on death. You just experienced a traumatic event. However, if it is pervasive, if you're spending more time during the day than not thinking about it, that's not particularly healthy. We'd like to help you find more of a balance there.
I'd like to add here, especially if you find yourself contemplating, well, my beloved's gone and I missed him so much, I'd be better off with my beloved. If at any point in the process that you find your mindset going in that direction, please seek out your pastor, whatever means of support you have, counseling to help you with that. Because when oftentimes we'll talk to our loved ones, which I feel is perfectly normal. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you find yourself going into the gray area of saying, well, my beloved's gone and I miss him so much, I'd just rather be with my beloved. That's the time when we have to really stop and get a handle on that, because that's when it's going into a far different area, what we call in my language, suicidal ideations. We don't want that because you have so many other loved ones that are depending on you, that love you, that are there for you. So when you find it going over into that little gray area, we need to just stop there and say, okay, this is not healthy for me. Let me step back and seek the help I need.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up. There's a fine line between suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation. Suicidal ideation is sort of the next step up. It's not uncommon to say, life would be so much easier if I was with my loved one, or I just want to stop the pain and I just want to go to sleep and not wake up. That one could possibly construe that as suicidal thoughts. However, it's not uncommon to hear people say that while they're grieving. It's when the thoughts become more pervasive and you start really thinking about this as a viable option to stop the pain. Please know that there are many different supportive services out there to help you deal with that. Feelings of depression. It's perfectly understandable that one would have feelings of depression when a loved one has died. However, like suicidal thoughts, there's a tipping point. If your depression is pervasive, if it's something that happens all day long for an extended period of time, not a matter of days or weeks, but we're talking maybe now months or years, then yeah, that depression isn't a depression that is attributed to a situation like the death of a loved one. It may be more of what is referred to as a clinical depression that could benefit from some sort of treatment. So there's a difference. Perfectly understandable that one would be depressed after the death of a loved one. It's the intensity and duration of that depression that needs to be looked at. And bottom line, if you just feel like you need to talk to somebody, know that there are many resources out there to talk about your feelings. So now we're going to switch gears as we're in the wrap up of our presentation. We're now going to focus on how to be a supportive presence to an individual who's grieving.
Joe?
Yeah.
Can I just do a checkpoint on time?
Absolutely.
We've got about 20 minutes left, and I'm wondering whether people would like to have more chance to ask questions as opposed to go into this next section.
Absolutely. Any questions?
I'm interested in
Okay.
supportive.
Okay.
Is that okay with everyone else? We go ahead and continue?
Any?
Have a shorter time for Q&A? Anyone feel differently? Okay.
All right. Thanks. So, companioning someone on the grief journey. Well, as we mentioned earlier, one of the single biggest way that you can be a supportive presence is to listen. Again, not what we define as listening, but really an active listening process. Be in the moment with that person. Allow them to express their feelings without judgment. Huge. Do not impose your own experience on their grief journey. Oh, my mom died too. I know exactly how you feel. No, you don't. No, you don't. We have similarities. Both our mothers died. But aside from that, that's it. Your grief is different from mine. Reflect back what you heard them say. We touched on that earlier. So what I think I'm hearing you say is that you're really unsure about what your next step is in life. Wow, you heard me. And you didn't try to fix that. Thank you. Be an active listener. It means, again, responding back as someone is talking by acknowledgement, nodding your head, not interrupting them, but nodding your head. And again, surmising what you feel you heard that individual say. Talk about the person who died. You know, here's a memory I have of John, and I want to share it with you. Is that okay? And be patient with that person's process. Their grief journey is going to be completely different than yours, or the person next door, or the person down the street, or the person in the next county. There is no universal way to grieve. So what can you do to help? Don't ask, just do. I don't know if this has happened to you early in your grief journey, or even now where someone says, I'm here for you. Just let me know what you need. Well, that places the responsibility on the person who's grieving to have the bandwidth to know what they need. You're already in an emotionally labile state. Your emotions are everywhere. Now someone trying to be helpful is coming and go, look, I'm here 24/7. You just let me know what you need. I don't even know what the next hour holds for me, let alone what I need right now. So rather than making that statement, which again, guilty, I've done that a million times, show up, mow the lawn, take the garbage out, do a grocery run, feed the dog, pull weeds in the garden. Just do it, as the Nike ad says.
And then an even better one is just sit. Just sit with them in that silence. Oftentimes, humanity is not comfortable with silence. They always feel like there's got to be some kind of noise in the background, or we have to talk. It's in the nonverbal that's the most powerful. So just go there and just sit. If they want to sit, then just sit with them. If they want to talk, then talk. But there's power in silence.
Mhm.
And as a society, we discount that. That's when the most profound work happens, is in the silence. Because although you're not talking with words, you're talking with your body, the nonverbal cues, the body language.
Yeah. And again, I think it's important that we have appropriate expectations of the person who's grieving. You know, again, our culture is a little uncomfortable with the grief process. So whether it's implied or not, we tend to place a timeline on grief. And that timeline varies according to the relationship of the person who died. So for a grandparent, we go, well, you know, they were on in years. Death was expected eventually. So I'm going to give you X amount of time to mourn, to grieve. If it's the death of a spouse, we might give someone longer time to grieve. If it's the death of a child, we don't want to talk about that at all. I don't want to hear it. It's not comfortable for me. So don't share that grief with me. So just understand that the person who's grieving isn't going to be the person you remember them to be before this loss. And getting back to who you need them to be may be a while. Be patient with them. Their journey is their journey. A grieving, as I mentioned, a grieving person isn't the same person they were before the loss. They're not going to go back to being that person again because their lives have been forever changed. Don't take it personally. A grieving person isn't going to have the same kind of communication style that they would outside of their grief. So they may come across as a little curt or not 100% who they were prior to the experience. And keep checking in, even if they keep telling you they're okay. Because again, that's what society kind of expects when we ask people how they're doing. What we expect to hear is okay. Have you ever told somebody when they asked you how you're doing, you said, not so good, and they go, oh, great, and then change the subject? Again, it's what we expect people to say rather than listening to what they're telling us. Addressing feelings of loss and grief. Allow the individual to set the pace of how they're going to express their grief. Okay, well, you know what? I had the same kind of loss and it took me 6 months. Go. No, it's going to be different for that individual. It's going to take the time that it takes. Be honest and not evasive. Be straightforward. Being straightforward can decrease anxiety, provide comfort, and cultivate trust. If someone is asking you, how do I get through this? It's perfectly okay to say, I don't know, but I'm going to be here with you every step of the way. And we'll go through it together. Be available to the wide range of thoughts and emotions that are expressed. You may think that that person needs to be sad, but they're rolling on the floor and with laughter. Hey, it is their grief journey, so it's not a matter of right or wrong. And through awareness and acceptance of your own mortality, you can relate to another person's grief journey. It's the empathy muscle that we need to exercise. I'm here. I don't know what you're going through. I've experienced my own kinds of losses, and I know how I've felt about that. So I'm informed somewhat, but I'm going to keep an open mind because your process may be different. So what not to say, and perhaps you've heard some of these, and maybe time permitting, if there are any that are not on this list and you're wanting to share, I would love to hear them. So it was God's will. You're lucky you had this time together. He, she, they, is, or are in a better place. I have a friend who went through the same experience. I know how you feel. I see a lot of heads nodding, yeah, shaking. Don't be sad. Focus on the happy times you had together. Or my favorite, which I didn't save for last, but I'm going to. Shouldn't you be over this by now? It's been 6 months. It's been a year. It's been 2 years. It's been 5 years. Come on now. So, in closing, I want to offer you a little poem that I feel speaks to what I hope the holidays will be for you on some level. It's called Tinsel and Tears by Darcy Sims and Andrea Gambrill. Do what you can this season and let it be enough. But whatever you do, try not to lose the holiday completely. It may not be the same as it was before, but it is the holiday season and you're in it. No matter how shattered your life, how fragmented your dreams, there must be light somewhere. There must be hope somewhere. Our loved ones have died. We did not lose them, nor did we lose the love we shared. Our loved ones were and still are part of us. We cannot lose their love or our love for them. So thank you. Thank you very much for being part of this presentation. On the next slide, could you put the last slide up by any chance? That's okay. On the very last slide that will be made available once they're online, you will see some resources for grief support. Hospice East Bay is certainly one of them. However, there's a sister organization a little farther south from us called Hope Hospice. They also offer grief support services. And please know that both of our hospice and Hope Hospice provide grief services to anyone in the community in need, meaning that your loved one did not have to be under our care to access our support. And Hospice East Bay offers this support to members of the community free of charge. In addition, there's another really valuable resource called the Contra Costa Crisis Center. They too have a program on grief and loss, and that information is also on the slide, as you can see. So thank you. Thank you very much.